to want to recognize both Chinas. I'm now talking of 1949. Both Chinas. Peking China as well as Taipei China. I know that such a solution would have been disagreeable to both. And the India government would probably have had to sever connections with both. Neither would have agreed with it. But if the India government had put forward this solution of a recognition of both governments in 1949, the mind of the world would have worked on it, and probably something would have come out of it. I might also suggest that much of the Asian mind has gone wrong precisely because of India not having made this distinction clear. In recognizing Peking China, I suspect that my Prime Minister wanted to give himself the aura of revolutionary integrity by borrowing it. There is a certain type of Asian and African, also Englishmen, particularly, Oxford and Cambridge are beautiful universities in regard to this. They teach you the art of practicing revolution in the sphere of foreign policy without having to practice home. I suspect that my government has done something similar. I give you another illustration, again from 1946-47, when the whole world, particularly the countries like America and England, were caught up in the bog of making a distinction between victor nations and vanquished nations. Germany and Japan lay low. At that time, your government and your president were trying to teach them democracy as against fascism and militarism. I had suggested, incidentally, I point out that way back in 1949, 1950, I had suggested this to my government, that they should recognize both Chinas. I'm not saying this as an afterthought. And in 1946-47, I had suggested to my government to make it clear to the whole world that it did not make any distinction between victors and vanquished. All mankind was alike to it. That it wanted to start on a clean slate. A simple, clear, ringing declaration of this kind would have, I believe, been somewhat like Lincoln's or Lenin's declaration. Now, my government has been totally incapable of any such simple professions of faith. That is probably due also to the fact that my government ministers are very clever. They want to be Jesuits, Please, if any one of you is a Jesuit, please don't misunderstand me. Jesuits are people of exemplary refinement, and they have a tradition of at least, shall I say, 10 or 15 centuries of very refined diplomacy. Now, my government, without that tradition, without the strength, without anything to back it up, tried to practice this kind of Jesuit diplomacy, and that has been a very great error. And my ultimate argument about the United Nations would be that I would like to have a world parliament rather than the United Nations. The United Nations is an assembly of representatives of government. I would want to have an assembly of representatives of the people, elected on the basis of their due vote. You might suggest that I'm being very selfish. My country consists of 500 million people. To that, my answer would be, all right, have weightages. Give weightages to regions with smaller populations. So that is in brief what I would like to do with the United Nations, or with myself, with my country. Now, there's a gentleman somewhere here with raise. Right.
I'd like to thank you on behalf Those of you who would like to speak with Dr. Loria personally might care to step forward.
I don't know, somehow I'm required to answer
questions which are not which don't put me in a very favorable light, because, one has to say yes to things in order to appear to be reasonable. And more often than not, I say no. If Bhutan had been conceived as one of the many answers to the land problem in India, I would have subscribed to it. But as it has been put forward as the only solution, an exclusive solution to the land problem, I have to reject it to that extent. You have probably heard that Bhutan is a program of asking for land gifts from those who possess enough of land and redistributing such land gifts to those who do not possess it. It is therefore a voluntary effort, or what you might call a charity effort. Although, of course, the sponsors of the movement would not like using that word charity. Even assuming that no such debasing giving and receiving were involved, I suggest that about 7 or 8 years of this movement have now conclusively proved that in the background of the immense land problem in India, the achievement is very slender. We have a total acreage of 300 million under cultivation. 300 million. The total collected in the Bhutan movement so far is somewhere around 4 million, of which a substantial part is unusable land. Those who give things away in charity sometimes take care to see that such objects are no longer vastly usable. But even assuming that 2-3 million of this were usable, the extent of the performance is very small compared to the issue involved. Even so, I would have accepted it if the sponsors of the movement had not emphasized its virtues so much as to exclude other possible movements, such as, for instance, action by the poor against landlords, against landlords, for redistribution of land through agitation or civil disobedience and the like, or governmental action through framing of new laws. If it were one out of several programs, I still think it might have been a worthwhile venture. I would refer briefly to the philosophy involved, which is Gandhiism in its priestly forms. Now, every doctrine has two forms, a governmental form and a non-governmental people's or priestly form. Same with Marxism, same with free enterprise, same with any other doctrine. Now, this doctrine of Gandhiism, after it attained power, after it became the government, branched off into two directions. One, the governmental direction, that is the government of India and the various state governments operating on the Gandhian plane through administration, decrees and laws, and the other on this plane of the people, or I would prefer to call it the priestly plane, the non-governmental custodians of the doctrine. And whether or not it is true of all other doctrines of Gandhianism, that is certainly true, that there is a third form. For instance, I too sometimes call myself a Gandhian, but I am the heretic Gandhian. So the heretic Gandhian, the priestly Gandhian, and the governmental Gandhian, these are the three manifestations of the doctrine in my country today. I believe that the priestly Gandhian, whatever he might say, is some kind of an appendage to the government and is therefore not in a position to perform the main tasks of this doctrine in any effective way. Yeah. It's always very difficult to answer such questions about oneself. For one thing, one is always slightly regretful about the past. And one is tempted to think that one might have done better if one had taken a different course. And you are opening me to that temptation. For one thing, these reports become exaggerated because they bring out an aspect of one's life in a very summary manner. It's not as though mine was a complete and total rejection. Now, for instance, when I was offered the secretaryship of the Congress Party by Mr. Nehru when he became its president, I put some conditions before him. 3 conditions, 2.5 of which he refused. You couldn't call that an outright rejection, could you? This was way back in 1946. He was about to become the vice president of the Viceroy's Executive Council. You know, post preliminary to the Prime Minister's post. And so my first condition was that he should not assume office under the British government while continuing to be the president of the Congress Party. To which he said yes, he accepted the theoretical position, but he was not willing to apply it to himself. That is, to continue to be the president of the Congress Party even after he had been offered that particular governmental post under the British. And then my second condition was that nobody in the government should be permitted to become a member of the party's executive, which he flatly refused. And third, that the party should be permitted to criticize in a benevolent way the doings of the government. And when the government does wrong, the party should be in a position to criticize it. To which he said, now look, what is benevolent criticism and what is malevolent criticism? Would you give a formula? I said, now these formulas are not set down on paper. They depend very much on the goodwill of persons concerned. Now that is one case. And the other about that Ministry of Education is not quite correct. It was the Ministry of Propaganda, Information on Broadcasting, and it came up in the course of the conversation with Mahatma Gandhi. I don't know which part of it to dismiss as fun, which part of it to take seriously. It was a rather pleasant conversation as far as I was concerned, because one thing led to another, and he asked me, should he, for instance, go about saying that I was better than Mr. Nehru? I mean, this offering of this post and that post, and I laughed in a rather uproarious manner, to which he, more or less, Mahatma Gandhi, returned an answer corresponding to the spirit of your question. That whenever something is offered to you, you reject it. That was what Gandhiji said. To which I said, now you must offer me something in right earnest and not in this fashion. When you start saying that, when you stop saying that Mr. Nehru and his like are the best in the country, then you make me an offer. To which he said, did I expect him to say that I was better than Mr. Nehru? I said, I see nothing wrong in that statement. But that was 1946. You must remember, in 1946 and 47, we were still somewhat equal. I mean, Mr. Nehru was still my teacher, half teacher, I should say. I'd given up thinking on his pattern. Also not my leader in that complete way, but he still continued to be a part leader. And there was a relationship of comparative equality. But since 1947, much has happened. He is the Prime Minister of the country, and I'm a very ineffective person, which has led you to ask this question of me.
Another question?
Yeah.
Could you summarize the prospects of growth?
Economic growth? Very little. Very little. To attain your present standards, we would need at least 100 years. It's possible that we might need 200 years. The present rate of growth is between 2 and 3%. And I sometimes suspect that in certain years it falls below 2%. But the government, not very successfully, conceals these statistics. And a 2% expansion in Indian terms would mean about $1, less than $1.50 per person per year. And if you contrasted it with your own rate of growth, which is also 2 and 3%, these statistical percentages can be very misleading. Indian propagandists, for instance, go about saying that America and India expand at the same rate of growth, which is 3%. Whereas the 3% in the case of America comes to about 15,000, 450, nearly 90, or 100, say $95 a year per person. So the rate of growth in India is $1 and less than $1.50 per person per year, while the rate of growth in the U.S. is $95 per person per year.
So you're speaking of rate of growth in per capita income. Is there any growth in the quantitative nature of your national economy? Like there are more services becoming available overall due to medical economy?
All that is taken into account in this rate of growth. I mean, it's not merely the primary produce or the manufacture, but also the tertiary, this kind of services, all that is taken into account. Although that was a good question you asked me, that is precisely the mistake which my planning minister made when he answered my argument about rate of growth and how poor the vast majority of the population was. But in making such calculations, everything is taken into account. At least so they say. These are their own figures. I mean, I'm not manipulating them in any way. Yes, sir?
What do you think the best solution would be from the economic point of view? To follow a post-socialistic program or to follow the capitalistic private
if we must use these categories, as to a certain extent, I think we are entitled to use them, although I would lay down a proviso. these categories of capitalism, socialism, communism appear to be universally valid ideas. They are in fact not so. They are valid only for certain periods of human experience, and they are valid in connection with certain accidents of history. Now, for instance, American capitalism, Indian capitalism, and German capitalism are not phenomena that could be treated on a similar plane of discussion. They are different phenomena. They are connected with certain accidents, uniquenesses of Indian or American or German history. For instance, I would not take Indian capitalism as a replica of American capitalism. There is very little of technological revolutionizing in Indian capitalism, which is wholly untrue of American. I mean, American capitalism, if anything, has been a technological revolution right through. Furthermore, Indian capitalism would be essentially feudal, while American capitalism would be essentially modern. Now, this is by way of certain provisos. Even so, we have to make use of these categories of thought, you're right. I should think that any commendable expansion of India's agriculture and industry would depend very much on the amount that we can invest in such expansion. No matter how much foreign assistance we might receive, this expansion or investment has to come from internal resources. So obviously, it would depend on the amount that we can save from our annual consumption. I believe that a large part of India's total or gross national produce is used up in the consumption of the few people at the top, because it is luxury consumption. This world is imitative. It is quite possible that say 10 or 15 or 20 centuries ago, various parts of the earth imitated India. Today, almost all parts of the earth imitate Euro-America. So they imitate your living standards, even before reproducing your productive equipment. It's much easier to go down the hill than to go up. Now, you took about 300 years to achieve your present productive equipment, or let us say at least 200 years. So even before we have achieved that productive equipment, our men on the top, the bureaucratic minority, the capitalist minority, but the bureaucratic much more than the capitalist because they are larger in number, they have begun imitating your standards of consumption. I mean, air conditioning, of course, and luxurious cars, although there are certain laws against their free import, but then embassies and the like, somehow or other they manage to overcome these laws, and all other wasteful expenditure. My own calculation is that somewhere near 25 billion rupees, that would come to $5 billion a year, could be saved from this luxury expenditure of the top minority without really bringing discomfort to them. I mean, they would still live in comfort, though not in luxury, luxury of the modern type. But on any calculations, the most moderate ones, the saving would be at least $2 to $2.5 billion a year. Now this could be invested into agriculture and industry for purposes of further expansion. This I believe to be the greatest requirement of the Indian situation. And when I presented this program to the House of the People, which corresponds to the House of the Representatives of the American scene, but the House of Representatives in India is very much more powerful than the Senate, because our Senate is more or less like the House of Lords. So when I presented this program, the foreign minister had just the finance minister had just one answer, and he said, very few people would stand this kind of a dictatorial act. I had said that a limitation of 1,000 rupees a month, that is $200 a month, could be imposed on all personal expenditures for the time being. Let's say for the next 20 or 30 years. I was not laying it down as a socialist proposition of equality and justice. I was in fact laying it down as a capitalist proposition of expansion. Let us expand our industry and agriculture. And to that the answer was, it would be a dictatorial act. Incidentally, I must make it clear that when I ask for this imposition of a limit on personal expenditure, I am not asking for redistribution of that money among the poorer sections, that their wages might be increased. That is not what I am asking for. I am asking for this limitation with a view to make a saving, substantial saving, and to invest it in agriculture and industry. That is, well, you call it socialism or what you will. I suppose it is socialism in a certain way, yeah. But then this is socialism more or less as a measure of capitalism. Whereas capitalism in India is unable to fulfill its primary function of providing capital. Yes, sir?
Sir, Nehru's daughter and Khrushchev's men supposedly are in political agreement. He has broken relations with Khrushchev's men while he his daughter. Other than the reason that he is his daughter, why doesn't he serve the Senate and the
I didn't quite get your question. Nehru's daughter and Krishna Menon.
I suppose that they're in political agreement. Now, Nehru has covered relations with Senate, and he has retained his daughter. Now, other than serving his daughter, why has he retained her and he's part of the agreement?
Most of your assumptions are wrong. Nehru is a far cleverer man than you might assume him to be. Well, I don't know which assumption should I now clarify. For one thing, very few fathers would be able to abandon their daughters. And I like President Truman for being so charming to his daughter, Margaret or somebody, you know. You remember that story, don't you? Or you don't? You were far too young then, or some of you might not even have been born. You know, some music critic. Yeah. But that was only by way of a digression, you know. In the first place, Nehru has not severed his relations with Krishna Menon quite to that degree. Secondly, although these mysterious ways of the Nehru coterie are somewhat unknown to me in that fashion, you know, in that fashion of detail, I should think that his daughter is not that simple. Whatever else she might or might not possess, I believe she possesses her father's skill in navigating several courses at the same time. Secondly, although these mysterious ways of the Nehru coterie are somewhat unknown to me in that fashion, you know, in that fashion of detail, I should think that his daughter is not that simple. Whatever else she might or might not possess, I believe she possesses her father's skill in navigating several courses at the same time. I don't know whether she would like my saying this about her, but I say this more as a tribute to her craft, statecraft, that is. Yes.
We were discussing the other day that your theory of the four pillars aspects of government decentralization has been adopted in terms of platform that has been like action taken. It also seems that several of the Twitter parties have also gone to this idea. Now, is there any possibility that these various Twitter parties could form a coalition to drive home this one point and say, form any effective opposition to the Congress and put the pressure on them, so to speak, to give this party a move?
As to the four-pillar state, may I point this out that ever since I became familiar with your own campaign, that is, when I say your own, I mean the certain section of the American people initiated that campaign for world government, but I preferred the campaign for world parliament to a campaign for world government. I started talking of a five-pillar government, but that is just by way of a little evolution of the idea. Incidentally, the Congress Party, as several other parties, have sometimes accepted my nomenclature, but strangulated the idea. Now, for instance, my four-pillar state would necessarily have meant devolution of real power. Power that is often the attribute of sovereignty. I don't mean defense sovereignty, foreign policy sovereignty and the like, but certainly police powers, for instance. I would not want police powers to be held at the third level, that is the state level, as they are being held today. I would want them to be devolved to the second and the first, that is the village and the district and the city level. That is one example. Another, my idea of corporate or collective ownership is not a replica of what has ordinarily been accepted by European socialists. They think of social ownership alone in terms of federal ownership or central ownership, whereas I have perhaps fondly, not very concretely, held to the idea that ownership too could be distributed at various levels. For instance, agricultural ownership I would not like to be held at the state or the federal level. I would like it to be held at the village and the district level. Maybe certain other types of ownership could be similarly distributed. Now that is with regard to how this concept of the four-pillar state, although accepted in certain aspects of its nomenclature, was actually strangulated. As to the second part of your question, is why we don't combine these various splinter parties in order to realize at least this one program, my answer is this. Perhaps we have been inclined to emphasize air command. Sometimes I wish all air commands were abolished. Sometimes I wish my country had one too. I mean, you know. But I guess in the interest of humanity, if all commands were abolished, that would be better. Don't you think so? Now, it is possible that we have emphasized principle overmuch to the neglect of expediency or exploitation of available opportunities, which certainly is not opportunism. I mean, after all, what is politics? Politics is the art of the possible. And sometimes when I look back on my own past, I feel that perhaps I have not been a politician in that sense of the term. I have not exploited politics as the art of the possible. At the same time, one has to think of what the world needs by way of ideas and principles, because politicians tend to engross themselves overmuch in the needs of the moment, with the result that their peoples and mankind lose sight of the fundamental, the far-reaching, the enduring. Now, that is by way of some background, but effort is made from time to time to achieve this kind of combination. At the moment, I too am wandering into such a kind of effort. I have offered, for instance, to another socialist party, which calls itself the Praja Socialist Party, an unconditional merger. That is, no previous agreements in relation to policy. Let us first have the union and then hammer out a policy. But then, even after 7 years of their having said it repeatedly, that they wanted precisely this kind of thing, they are now putting forward preconditions for a merger.
So what are your feelings on Kashmir? Do you think that you favor both sides will allow Kashmir to decide for themselves whether they want to join Pakistan?
It's always difficult for a man like me who has none of the authority of the government and yet who has to answer questions about governmental positions, you know. I think yes.
Because we have another 5 minutes. And I think the class would benefit more from you developing that last point in a little more detail.
Oh, no, don't try to save me. I'll answer that question. No, I'll answer that question. I think both the governments of India and Pakistan have handled this problem very badly. I do not believe in the solution of plebiscite. That would be a further worsening of the problem. On the other hand, I think that both governments have been positively evil in their handling not alone of Kashmir, but the entire region of Indo-Pakistan relationship. However fantastic that might sound to be at the moment, I hold, however, to the idea of an Indo-Pakistan confederation. Should such a confederation come into existence, I wouldn't mind Kashmir going anywhere. Kashmir might belong to Pakistan, it might belong to India, or it might be a separate entity in this confederation. If I had my way, I would make your blasted president, I was going to say. Is that all right? I would make your blasted president realize the wisdom of such a policy instead of taking up these questions one by one, you know. America is interfering, as of course everybody with power is interfering. I too would interfere if I had power. But let America interfere in things with a little more wisdom, with a little more enduring sight. And if the U.S. exercised its influence and authority to get some kind of a reunion of India and Pakistan, not necessarily a political reunion, it might be an economic reunion or some kind of a loose confederation into being, then this problem of Kashmir, at least as far as I'm concerned, could be handled anyway.
Would you care
Yes.
to develop this point about the problem of party mergers, since we're very much into party politics in this course? Do you see any foreseeable mergers of a significant opposition to Congress in the next decade or so?
Oh, decade most definitely, Professor Maher. Decade, yes. I thought you were thinking in terms of the next few months or decades, most definitely. Decades, most definitely, because I foresee a time when the Indian electorate, out of sheer disgust with the opposition leadership, would begin exercising its mind on who is the best opposition. So either the opposition parties would combine, or else my opposition, which is obviously the best opposition, would be accepted by the electorate. Isn't there sense in what I have said?
Well, sensible, because you insist that they captain any section of the Congress Party.
I don't know. I mean, after I had made my speeches in the House, some of them come along to me and tell me in private how much they had liked it. But then a public expression of it doesn't happen. You see, they're so frightened of their positions. With a Congress ticket, do you call that a ticket? Nomination. With a Congress nomination, it's comparatively easy to win an election, as long as we don't smash up this. So, for instance, I definitely believe that if the Congress party lost half a dozen by-elections to the House of the People in succession, one after another, quite a few congressmen would think of deserting that party and coming over to one or the other opposition party.
You don't visualize any foreseeable coalition growing up, so I mean, you can't anticipate what groups might join you in forming a substantial opposition apart from the Project Socialist?
Now, of these two, what are commonly called right parties, Swatantra Party and the Jansang, the Swatantra Party might appear to be more modern because it talks a little more modernly, about free enterprise and the like. But then its composition is limited mainly to the I would say top classes, middle classes and the upper reaches. Whereas the Jansang, which is more a religious party, has gone into the lower classes of the population. And in the past few years, there is a certain inclination on the part of Jansang members to think more radically. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jansang wears round to some kind of combination.